Do you know who was George Washington? Why his photo in American dollars? What he did? Why everybody called him the kind-hearted father of the country? If not, okay, don't leave. I will explain his long life history in short. George Washington was born on February 22, 1732, into a prominent family in Westmoreland County, Virginia. His father, Augustine Washington, was a wealthy planter, and his mother, Mary Ball Washington, was his father's second wife. The Washington family owned several plantations, worked by enslaved people, which gave them a prominent social standing in colonial Virginia. Washington's father died when he was 11 years old, leaving George in the care of his older half-brother, Lawrence Washington. Lawrence played a significant role in young George's life, acting as a mentor. He helped George secure his first job as a surveyor in the Virginia colony. Though Washington did not receive a formal education comparable to other founding fathers, his practical education, particularly in surveying, helped him build a successful early career. In 1749, at the age of 17, Washington became the official surveyor of Culpeper County, Virginia. This was his first taste of professional success, and it laid the groundwork for his later ventures into land speculation. He bought and developed vast tracts of land in the Shenandoah Valley and beyond, which made him one of Virginia's wealthiest men later in life. However, Washington's ambitions weren't limited to land and business. He was eager for a military career, which led him to volunteer for the Virginia militia in 1752. The French and Indian War, 1754–1763, began. Washington's first major venture into military service came during the French and Indian War, the North American front of a global conflict between Britain and France. At the time, both powers sought control over the rich fur trade and fertile lands of the Ohio Valley. In 1753, the governor of Virginia sent Washington, then just 21 years old, on a diplomatic mission to warn the French to leave the Ohio Valley. The mission was perilous, and although Washington successfully delivered the message, the French refused to leave. In 1754, Washington led a small expedition to build a fort at the strategically critical juncture of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, modern-day Pittsburgh. This expedition led to a skirmish with French forces, which escalated into a full-scale conflict. Washington's troops hastily constructed Fort Necessity, where they were quickly overwhelmed by the French. Washington was forced to surrender, marking his first major military failure. Despite this defeat, Washington emerged as a local hero, and his bravery gained the attention of the British Army. In 1755, he was made an aide-de-camp to General Edward Braddock during a campaign to reclaim the Ohio Valley from the French. However, Braddock's campaign ended in disaster when his army was ambushed, and Braddock was killed. Washington led the survivors to safety, solidifying his reputation as a fearless leader under fire. Washington continued to serve in the Virginia militia during the rest of the war, but his experiences during this period were a mix of success and frustration. He became disillusioned with the British military, which he felt treated colonial officers like himself as inferior. He resigned his commission in 1758 after the British finally captured Fort Duquesne, renamed Pittsburgh, shifting his focus back to civilian life. After that, his life as a planter and politician began in 1758 to 1774. After the war, Washington returned to Mount Vernon, the estate he inherited from his half-brother Lawrence. In 1759, he married Martha Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 children. The marriage was one of social and financial convenience, cementing Washington's place among the Virginia elite. Although George and Martha had no children of their own, he became a devoted stepfather to her children. At Mount Vernon, Washington focused on expanding his estate and improving his agricultural methods. He became one of Virginia's most successful planters, though his wealth was closely tied to the labor of enslaved people. Throughout his life, Washington owned hundreds of enslaved individuals, a fact that complicates his legacy. Politically, Washington's status as a landowner and military veteran made him a natural leader in Virginia society. He was elected to the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1758, where he served until 1774. During these years, Washington became increasingly involved in colonial politics. He opposed British taxation, particularly the Stamp Act of 1765, which he saw as an unjust imposition on colonial liberties. The growing rift between Britain and its American colonies began to escalate in the 1770s. Washington attended the First Continental Congress in 1774, where he voiced his support for armed resistance if necessary. The outbreak of hostilities between colonial militias and British troops in Massachusetts in 1775 marked the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. Washington was unanimously chosen by the Second Continental Congress to lead the Continental Army in 1775. His experience, leadership qualities, and reputation as a man of integrity made him the ideal candidate. He took command of a fledgling, poorly equipped force in desperate need of organization and discipline. Washington's early campaigns were fraught with challenges. His army was no match for the professional British soldiers, and he suffered several defeats, including the disastrous defense of New York in 1776. However, Washington's daring crossing of the Delaware River on Christmas night in 1776, leading to a victory at the Battle of Trenton, revived the revolutionary cause. This was followed by another victory at Princeton. Perhaps Washington's greatest skill was his ability to maintain the army's morale during the darkest periods of the war. The winter at Valley Forge, 1777–78, tested his leadership, as his men endured brutal conditions, lack of food, and disease. Despite these hardships, Washington's leadership and the training provided by Baron von Steuben transformed the Continental Army into a more effective fighting force. One of Washington's most significant achievements was his ability to keep the Continental Army together in the face of overwhelming odds. The war dragged on for several more years, with Washington suffering more defeats than victories. However, his patient strategy of avoiding large-scale battles with the British allowed him to preserve his army. Washington's perseverance paid off in 1781, when, with the help of French forces, he trapped British General Charles Cornwallis at the Siege of Yorktown. Cornwallis's surrender effectively ended the war, though peace would not be formally declared until the Treaty of Paris in 1783. After the war, Washington faced one of his greatest moments of personal integrity. Rather than seize power, as many feared he might, he resigned his commission and returned to private life at Mount Vernon. This act earned him worldwide admiration, with many likening him to the Roman statesman Cincinnatus, who left his plough to lead Rome in times of war but returned to his farm after victory. However, Washington soon found himself called back to public service. The Articles of Confederation, the country's first governing document, proved too weak to manage the new nation. The states were deeply divided, and the country was on the brink of chaos. In 1787, Washington was persuaded to attend the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, where he was unanimously elected its president. Washington's role at the convention was primarily as a figurehead, but his presence lent legitimacy to the proceedings. The resulting U.S. Constitution established a strong federal government with a system of checks and balances. Washington was a fervent supporter of the new Constitution and played a key role in ensuring its ratification. In 1789, Washington was unanimously elected as the first President of the United States, a position he accepted reluctantly. His presidency was foundational for the new nation. He faced the enormous task of building a functioning government from scratch, creating precedents that would define the executive branch for generations. Washington surrounded himself with some of the nation's most talented minds, including Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury and Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State. These men often disagreed on the direction of the country, with Hamilton advocating for a strong central government and Jefferson supporting states' rights. Washington skillfully managed these rivalries while guiding the country through its formative years. Among his administration's significant achievements was the establishment of the first Bank of the United States, the resolution of the Whiskey Rebellion, and the signing of the controversial Jay Treaty with Britain. Though criticized for being too lenient toward Britain, the treaty averted war and maintained U.S. neutrality. Throughout his presidency, Washington sought to keep the United States out of foreign entanglements, a policy that was most famously articulated in his farewell address in 1796. He warned against the dangers of political parties and entangling alliances, advice that would shape U.S. foreign policy for more than a century. After serving 2 terms, Washington retired from public life in 1797, setting a precedent for future presidents. He returned to Mount Vernon, where he continued to manage his estate and pursue agricultural innovations. However, his final years were also marked by introspection about the institution of slavery. In his will, Washington made the decision to free his enslaved workers upon his wife's death, a significant action for a man of his standing. George Washington's portrait first appeared on the U.S. $1 bill in 1869, 7 decades after his death. His image replaced earlier designs on the $1 note, solidifying his place as a symbol of the first President of the United States and his leadership in the American Revolution. Washington was considered the "father of his country" for his role in founding and shaping the nation. His presence on the most widely circulated U.S. currency, the $1 bill, symbolizes his lasting impact on American history, governance, and national identity. Washington's image on the dollar bill has been a symbol of trust and authority in U.S. currency since 1869, reinforcing his status as a foundational figure in American history. In this way he showed up his contribution, dedication, loyalty and many more towards people and taking care by loving his citizen-like own child. Every called him the father of country. At last we would like to thank George Washington to make America one of the strong and loyalty country in the world, whereas America became one of the greatest dream country to live, to visit and to settle by the people in the world. Thank you, friend, for giving your valuable time. May God bless you and your family.